yet across the gulf of space, minds that are to our minds, as ours are to those of the beasts that perish, intellects vast and cool and unsympathetic, regarded this earth with envious eyes, and slowly and surely drew their plans against us. H.G. Wells, The War of the Worlds. Welcome to the Wandering Tangent Podcast. I'm BJ, with me is Jeff and Gary. Today we are continuing to do something a little different because today we are going to talk about the 1938 radio broadcast by the Mercury Theater Company on the air. Already said what year, right? Okay.
Yeah, 1938.
Anyway, War of the Worlds!
War of the Worlds.
War of the Worlds, starring Orson Welles before he was famous. I'm losing my voice already. This is going to be fun.
I know, you've been strenuously talking for about a minute now, BJ.
Been talking for like a whole minute, and my voice is already like, it's going to be great.
I can't talk. Okay.
Anyway.
Yes, 1938, not to confuse anyone with the many other films and other things that have come out,
Yeah,
but it's the radio broadcast.
Yeah, not the 1890s book or like the 54 movie.
54? Yeah, somewhere in the 50s
Yeah,
there was a movie.
Not the 2005, the Tom Cruise one?
Yeah, the Spielberg version of it, yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't such a big fan of that one, but we're not talking about that one today. We're talking about the radio broadcast. So, I forget, whose idea was this one? I think it was Gary, right?
Yep, he's the one we blame for this one.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
was
Okay,
going
I'm like Gary.
I was waiting to see when someone would ask me if I was gonna talk. Anyways, but yes, this one is my particular choice. I wanted to, last time we did something a little different, and this time I decided we'd also try something a little different. I just thought this would be kind of a cool thing to do, and it also allows us to talk about not just the broadcast itself, but also the cultural impact that it had. Because boy, I think a lot more people remember this one for the cultural impact than the actual,
Gary trying to end Rush around to get us to talk psychology or something.
Maybe. Anyways. But no, I was just, it ended up having much more of an impact than, or at least people like to talk about the impact that it had more than the actual story itself.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe. I mean, it's not a spoiler per se, but I don't know if you want to talk about that now or how you want to break up this particular conversation.
I mean, if you just wanted to
spoiler, quote unquote, or just 120 something.
There's a lot of people
story.
though. Even it's not just about how old it is. A lot of people haven't heard the original broadcast. They've just heard about it, I think, and maybe some people have never heard of it. But let's give our review. Like
I've said it before and I said it again. If we are your first exposure to anything we talk about, I'm so sorry.
So let's do a review, I guess.
All right. So Gary, you're first. What'd you think? Is this what is your synopsis of it? Like, what did you think of it, and do you recommend it?
So here's the thing. It's difficult to say I'd like to watch it because you can't watch this one. You have to listen to it. On the other hand, it's real easy to listen to, and that's just it. It's real easy to listen to. It's not a hard thing to get through. It's the story flows fairly well. It sounds pretty much like the kind of broadcast you'd hear all the time on the radio. For those people who don't know what a radio is, that is this pre-internet technology that people would listen to, that would broadcast all the time. And people would
I feel like Gary's talking down to a non-existent portion of our audience.
He's talking to people that would never ever
Being
listen
very
to it.
patronizing to people who theoretically don't know what a radio is.
But no, in all honesty, the impact of the radio has waned a lot. But back in the day, it used to be the center of information sharing, right? Which
Yes.
is something I guess we'll get into later, which is why it was this broadcast caused the reaction that it did. Yeah, in all honesty, the recording I got of it was fairly okay. It sounded very dated because, well, it kind of was. It probably was the recording of the original broadcast, and it was pretty nice. I liked it. Not to the point where I don't even know if you can go out and buy it, so I'm not gonna do that. But I'm definitely
Yes, I was gonna say, is now the time I sit here annoyed and you and Jeff try to invent new ways to twist and bend our rating system to something it was never meant to apply to.
No, in all honesty, I just give it to avoid controversy. I'm just going to give it a solid listen.
Yeah, give it a listen.
Okay, but
sometime.
as compared to what? What is your scale?
I guess
this is solidly in the middle. It's solidly in the middle of the scale. It's there's the listen to it section of our scale, or watch it section of the scale as applies to movies.
Okay, but what's the upper portion of a scale of something that you cannot actually buy? I don't think.
So the high end of the scale is that you get a copy of it, then you frame it on the wall, and then every time you pass it, you give it a love pat and say,
do you
"You're
frame
such
a
great-"
radio broadcast, Jeff?
Well, BJ, you could also buy.
Do you print out? Grab a thumb drive, put on the thumb drive, and frame the thumb drive?
Exactly.
BJ, you could be such a fan of it that you would actually buy some of the later installations of it, I guess, if you really wanted to. But I don't, so I'm just going to put it in a solid watch/listen.
Okay. Yeah, so I will go next here. So it's a really good broadcast. It's great for sci-fi enthusiasts, but is it going to be interesting to anyone who's not enthusiastic about War of the Worlds, the story, or for somebody who likes science fiction or likes old things? No, you're going to be bored. But yeah, it's fun. There's a lot of things that I'd like to talk about it, and yeah, it was good. It's good. Another mid-range, whatever scale we're using, sort of thing. Okay, and that's what I have to say.
The length you guys go to just try your best not to add a number to something. It's mid-range.
All right,
You all know
right.
what number
Our
I'm
system
thinking about,
is crashing and burning, and you're right, BJ. We started it, but here's the thing: you can start a system, but if people don't really acclimate to it, then usually it falls apart. It's like a star that just doesn't have enough gravity to hold itself together. It just
it's almost as if I saw that coming early on and said, "Hey, maybe you should change that." You guys are like, "No, it's funny."
But I like it, and it applies to this one because we're all calling it a watch or listen. So
If you can't watch it, you said it yourself. But anyway.
It's a listen. I said
you can
listen.
You can watch the radio that it's coming out. You
yes,
stand
you
in
can
front of the
watch the
radio and
radio.
stare at it.
It's almost as if we applied some sort of numerical code to our ranking system.
But we didn't want a numerical code, so we came up with a different thing.
It could just maybe make sense in every situation, as compared to trying to find analogs to watch or own or rent or whatever.
I think watching the radio as it's playing the broadcast is perfectly applicable to this particular situation. But BJ, what is your
BJ, tell
review of this? The broadcast itself, not the radio, not the ranking system.
Are you actually letting me talk now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Anyway, so I have, I went through, I don't want to call it a phase, but there was a point in time where I listened to a lot of old radio plays I could find in like podcast form. There's like podcasts out there that are like just a bunch of old radio plays. So this is not the first time I had listened to it. It's probably the first time in a while. And, it's the old radio play. I would assume anyone who tracks it down is at least interested in it. Because, it's not something you're going to stumble across accidentally, I don't think. But well, if you track it down, I think you'll probably enjoy it. It's worth a listen. It's entertaining enough.
Yeah.
Or if you want to apply that on your cryptic scale, go ahead and apply it on your cryptic scale.
Yeah. I actually don't like cryptic scales at all. I just like a description.
Then why are you siding on Gary on this?
Because I thought it would cause more hostilities.
Oh no!
I thought it would divide us and make us fight more often. I
feel pretty divided. I don't know how you guys feel.
Okay. Okay. Let's move on. Let's talk about this. We all just want to talk about it. So let's do that. So we're going, if anyone wants to stop and listen to it, and then you can you might have a better reference as to what we're talking about, so be it. But
it's only an hour long, so
a little less.
Oh,
a little less.
The recording I got
was like 54 minutes.
Yeah, it's less than an hour.
I guess it depends, because my recording did feel like it had a lot of padding with music interrupts.
But that was the original recording.
Yeah, that's part of the podcast, Gary.
Yeah.
So
the original recording did have music interlubes.
Yeah.
So is that the right pronunciation? Interlude?
Yeah.
Interlude? Okay.
Well, I guess we're going to start talking about that. Spoiler alert, everybody.
Yeah, spoiler alert.
For this 100 and something odd. Well, no, this one's only
the book
80-year-old broadcast.
90?
Something like that.
Anyway. So I guess the crux of the radio play, the thing it's most famous for, is that it sort of presents itself as a newscast. It starts off as like, we're in the blah blah blah, the such and such orchestra playing from such and such hotel in New York, and blah blah blah, and like, we're being the 24-hour news cycle by interrupting this every 10 seconds because something else happened.
Yeah, so in the very beginning, it does say that it is an entertainment broadcast. It briefly says it in the very beginning.
Oh, yeah, so...
but it's very easy to miss that part. Either you're not paying attention or you tune in after that part.
Well, I don't know how fair it is for me to say this coming into it knowing that it is a radio play and the context about the, quote, panic, quote, it caused. But...
and that's the thing is, I remember, because this is the story I remember hearing about when I was a kid about the panic that it caused. Weirdly enough, my grandmother said that her family had been out when that had happened, and so they had so they'd been getting home just at the tail end of it, and so their neighbors came over and said, hey, what's going on? Like, there's this huge thing that's going on, and they turned on the radio just in time to hear Orson Welles doing his little outro, and they're like, oh, I guess we missed this exciting broadcast.
So,
what do you guys think of it? Was it good? Should we try to listen to it some other time? And the guy's like, oh, we didn't realize it was that.
So the neighbors thought it was real, right? Yeah.
The neighbors thought it was real, and she...
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, and they thought it was, they just caught the outro where it was obviously just, this was just a joke, and you guys, haha, and I hope you laughed along with us, and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, like I have a vague memory of my grandma mentioned it once, but I forget what she said about it.
Hmm.
And she's not in a position for us to ask her about it anymore.
Yeah.
So,
Well, so we know, because there has been back and forth talk on how extensive the hysteria was. And I think a while ago, like years ago growing up, we'd read about this in history books. Even in school history class, I remember some sort of blurb about it. And it made it seem like it was a big hysterical event, that there were lots of people up in arms. And then later on, the other people have said, well, it really was just, there were some people who got their guns and got together, but it really wasn't in high numbers. And it was only within a certain area within the New England area that people started panicking and doing something about it. But apparently there were people around the country who were just tuning in. It's not like they grabbed their gun and were parading down the street, but they were tuning in and they were concerned because some people did actually believe it was real. And I don't blame them personally.
Yeah.
I mean, and well, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, and with the radio being the sole source of information that they had, you got to remember this is not like the day and age of the internet now, where we can find multiple sources of information. If a person wanted information from anything, they would have to be looking through. They'd have to be listening to their radio, right? And so if you've got one station just absolutely spewing that it's the end of the world, and everybody's tuning into that same station, and there's obviously it's gonna create a idea of some panic.
Sorry, I'm trying to interrupt with Les, but I'm doing a terrible job. So that's one of the things that lead people nowadays to believe it was not as big of a... So like from the research I did about it, it looks like yes, there were pockets of people who, did panic, but like, I guess the story that we grew up with of like, oh, people were jumping in their cars and they're fleeing to the hills, that seems to be like a combination of a bit of the Mandela effect and maybe some fake news from the newspapers at the time.
So some of the newspapers printed Martians are attacking. They didn't get this.
No, they didn't print that Martians were attacking it. Some people have made the argument that the newspapers played up the hysteria that the show caused.
Up the hysteria.
Yeah, because they were trying to what's the word? They were trying to discredit radio news because that was their direct competition.
I'm so glad, especially these days where that kind of thing just doesn't happen anymore.
Oh yeah,
that the news organizations would print something so obviously fake and salacious.
But no,
that would never happen.
Never
ever happen.
Never. What? Newspapers going? News media go into business for themselves? Why, I never.
Yes. That obviously now 80 years later, humanity has evolved to being something so much better than it was back then.
Yeah. I didn't know how much we were going to dive into that because I know we technically try to be apolitical around here. But
I don't mind poking fun of it a little bit, but anything more than that, I think.
I would say,
cause problems.
Well, here's the thing. Like, what really I think, I obviously wasn't around in the 1930s. I mean, obviously, right? I'm not that ancient, but the thing is that I get a sense. Maybe I'm wrong, but I get a sense that people very much trusted the news. They've really had a lot of trust in it. And they weren't really around a lot of media yet. You could go to the movie theaters and watch stuff there. Most people were reading a lot more back then. And so if you read something in print, having a news story that was designed as entertainment it's entertainment, but it's like in a news format. That was a little bit weird for people. And I think that's probably what it was, is that they were just thrown by the fact that that's not a normal media. If there were episodes that were coming out like that, like every week, then maybe it would have been more normal, but it's abnormal in their life for this format of a show.
Okay, but here's another thing that sort of argues against it being this big panic in the streets kind of thing. The radio program was a comparatively small one with a comparatively very small audience.
So it wasn't broadcasted everywhere.
It was not broadcasted everywhere. It was not one of the top ranking shows at the time.
So
like I read something somewhere that like there's a company that did like a telephone poll that night, and from what they could tell, like maybe 2% of people listening to radio were listening to that particular pod. I'm going to say podcast instead of broadcast a lot because broadcast,
same thing.
Yes,
same thing.
So,
I do have to interject with Jeff though. You weren't back in the 1930s, but you were around in the 90s, right? I mean, you were much younger. But
I remember vague nightmares from that time period. Yes, go ahead.
So, do you remember the movie Independence Day? BJ, do you remember it too? BJ?
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know if you know that in association with Independence Day, a lot of TV stations recorded news broadcasts, just kind of from an entertainment perspective, but it was actual, like they had the actual newscasters recording news broadcasts as if they were within the events of Independence Day.
Now, I have this very vague memory of something of when I was quite young, like younger than I was like before when Independence Day came out. I don't know when that came out, but we were probably teenager-ish.
Yeah. Like really.
But like I remember some sort of fake news broadcast that was kind of in the vein of the 1938 broadcast, so maybe it was like 88. It was like a 50-year anniversary thing. I say maybe because I was not able to find any confirmation this thing actually existed. But I just remember watching my family's very, very small CTR TV, and there's some news broadcast that my parents told me was not real about how jet fighters from our local Air Force base were like were being deployed to intercept some unidentified flying objects. That's all I remember about it, and I probably only remember it because the Air Force base that was named is the one that we grew up right next to.
So, and
like I said, I was not able to confirm the existence of this broadcast, so I could just be remembering something else totally wrong.
Well, here's the thing is, BJ's, I remember these broadcasts too, so very distinctly, as if it was real news. Yeah.
It was not for Independence Day. I was way younger than that.
Oh, okay. Well, I remember this one for like Independence Day, where they made like news broadcasts from the real news stations, but it was all just advertisement for Independence Day. And we all understood what it was. It was like a special for Independence Day. Maybe I should go look it up.
So it's an ad.
So it's an ad. It was an advertisement.
Yeah, it looks like Independence Day came out in 1996, so we would have been teenagers. The thing I'm thinking about, I was like probably younger than 10.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So here's a question. Oh, go ahead, Gary.
No.
I was going to trail us to another thing, but you can. Okay.
But now I think a lot of people understand. Obviously, I think people can, wait and understand what's going on. I kind of agree probably that there probably wasn't this massive reaction back in the 1930s with the original one. People would probably just kind of wait and see if this was actually real, because you don't make your life decisions based on something that happens in less than an hour.
Well, like that.
At least we're not.
The thing I was going to say like 5 minutes ago is that, and and again, I don't know how fair it is for me to say this, coming to it knowing it's a fake broadcast, but it was a real news broadcast. Boy, howdy, I wish our government would react that fast. Like, they had, like, boots on the ground and planes in the air in, like, 15 minutes, dude.
Yeah, seriously.
They were really good about getting cables in place so that they could continue the broadcast and continue. They even recorded like artillerymen zeroing in on targets, which I think that's part of it that should give it away that it's not a real news report. It's like there's no way that the news would be that good.
Like artillerymen firing at targets very, very close for artillery.
Yes. Usually it would be way further
like range 30 meters. I'm like 30 meters.
Well, yeah,
you're firing something. You're firing artillery at something like 10 feet away. Okay, not like 10 feet, but like
still,
that's
less than
a football field length away from you.
Yeah, you're practically aiming over the barrels at that point, and it's practically the barrel's pretty much aimed straight at whatever you're shooting at that range.
Yeah.
So just to make fun of the real news, because I know that was one of our talking points, but if it was real,
make fun of the real news. No,
if it was like
never do that.
Never.
If it was like the real news today,
Never.
it would be like, oh, something's happening, but we don't know exactly what's going on. So let's give you 25 different theories as to what it could be, and they'll just cycle through that forever and ever until finally there's like a press conference where they only tell you a little bit. But they just give you the basic thing.
But Jeff, I don't know if you caught it at least in mine. It said that there was a broadcast from San Francisco, from like this group of scientists in San Francisco, and they completely is right at the beginning. But they were like, "There's no way that what's happening is an alien spaceship. This is obviously just some swamp gas or something not."
There was volcanic activity on Mars.
Yeah, volcanic activity.
That's what
They're
they
just
said.
saying it's just volcanic activity on Mars, and that's it. And everybody should just calm down. When obviously there's
that's
this
like
was at the same time as machines were coming out of the spaceships and vaporizing people with heat beams.
To be
the
fair,
most dramatic part happened.
I think that happened before the. I think it happened before the heat ray. Yeah.
No, it was right after, according to what I remember. When my memory's flawless,
I could be wrong.
It was the reporter saying something's coming out of the ship.
Jeff.
Oh no, it's a heat ray. Oh no, he's vaporized Farmer John or whoever was going up to it,
and
or
now
somebody.
Let's cut to San Francisco, where the scientists there say it's completely just volcanic activity on Mars.
I know. Well, I think they cut to music, so you get this dramatic scene, and then you cut to this cheery music. It's like dun,
it's
dun, 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 and then it goes to a bunch of scientists.
They lose contact with their on-site reporter for technical difficulties.
Exactly.
But regardless, I kind of well, I guess we could start to transition into actually talking about the broadcast itself. That's a good way to do that.
I mean, we've kind of been talking about it at the same time because like the meat and potatoes of the broadcast is the part that plays itself off as a news broadcast. There's a little bit at the end, but that's not the good stuff.
Which is. Can I just say that? Oh, go ahead, Gary. No, it's your turn. You get the talking stick. Go ahead.
You get this because I was gonna kind of do a breakdown, just like a bare bones idea of what happened, and then we could talk. You fill it in.
I was gonna do a little thing that's very personal to me, but I am a fan of Orson Welles. Mm-hmm. I gotta say, he's an actor. He also directs movies, I think. He's also kind of a writer. Like, every time you hear him talk, you can tell he's educated. He's thought about what his material is. He's thought things through really well. And I really like listening to interviews that he's made later on. He's just such a clever guy. And not to confuse him with another person I'm a big fan of, which is H.G. Wells, who originally wrote
No relation.
No relation, but they can't. When I first started learning about them, I'd often get them confused. But the War of the Worlds story is excellently written. It's a really well-designed story, and I think there are stories about humans against strong opponents, like a bear or a kraken from the ocean, or many things like that. But what was unique about War of the Worlds is it was humans versus something that was beyond their intelligence. It was something that was intellectually more advanced. It understood science in a way that humans hadn't grasped. And anyway, someone else can go.
So, you're right, Jeff, where the humans were essentially unable to be, to withstand whatever was happening, right? It surprised me because I had watched some of the other representations of this long ago, and this was the first time hearing the original broadcast, but I didn't realize that in the original broadcast, at least one of the alien machines gets knocked out by the humans, right? But it took so much resources to make it happen, and then they lost.
If I may interject a little.
Yes.
So like I know the most common thing for the War of the Worlds nowadays is that the aliens have a force field or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So that was not in the original book by, as Jeff mentioned, for H.G. Wells. The invaders actually do take some losses. There's not really an what's the word? It's not really a scene like it in radio broadcast except maybe like the bomber, but in the book there's the scene with the warship Thunderchild.
Because
the Thunderchild kills like 3 tripods before it gets taken out, but it's like the last best hope of like a bunch of ships trying to make a break for it. So,
which at the time, a battleship, or I don't know if it was a cruiser or destroyer, but it's an armed ship. It's a heavily armored, big guns.
It was like
it's a warship.
Runner,
something. But a ship of that time was the apex of military technology. Whereas every time they move the storyline further, they usually get whatever the best weapon that people have at the time. They use it against the aliens. And it's like, here's our best weapon. Here's them. We kind of did well against them, but in reality, it's just nowhere near enough to stop them. In the radio broadcast, they use bombers, which is the best weapon they had, the most advanced weapon of 1938. But yeah.
And so just to reiterate just kind of like the bare bones of what happens in this story. So basically there's like a volcano, or there's like some sort of massive explosions. People think it's volcanoes on Mars.
Ships, it's a gas plume. They say their spectrometers say it's hydrogen.
So basically it's they see the launches from Mars' surface. The ships end up landing on Earth, and then out of the ships come giant mechanical monstrosities. Like it's some sort of giant tripod robot. And then those things just start wreaking havoc across Earth, and eventually they get taken out by just the common cold, right?
It's just like bacteria. I think in this one they say...
Is it the common cold or just bacterial life?
In this one they say it's bacterial life. I think in maybe like the 1950 version they say it's the common cold.
Did they? Because from what I remember in the book, it was ambiguous, but it basically said in the book that the germs that we have been surviving against, that millions of people have died in order to somehow survive against the germs of Earth, all of that built us up a resistance, but the aliens did not have that resistance. They didn't have it. And because of that, because all those germs were new to them, those germs wreaked havoc on them and killed them. And that's what I remember from the book wording. And the book is worded so well. It has that really great 18th century language to it that is thoughtful and very well put together.
So
I don't know. Yeah.
So for a person who likes to geek out about like science fiction-y stuff, um, and I think all of us fit the same, giant robots, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
giant tripods.
giant robots before giant robots were cool. Anyways, but I think they were always cool. Anyways, so these things essentially had two weapon systems. I never remembered the second one, but it's becomes a very big thing in the storyline
Yeah.
for this particular broadcast, where there's this heat beam that everybody associates with these guys, but then also there's some sort of black smoke, some sort of gaseous attack.
Yeah. So and again, I think in most of the movies they don't really do the black gas because the aliens have the force field, so they can just shrug off anything. But in in the pod, I almost said podcast again. In the broadcast and in the book, artillery is used to some effect against the Martians. So the tripods just start gassing everything that may hold a gun,
Hmm.
uh, a cannon, artillery, shall we say, gun in the, I guess, artillery sense.
So that's kind of I guess a callback, because I think this was post. Oh no, you said this was in the book too.
Yeah.
The gas attack.
Yes, the black smoke was in the book. Yes.
So when was the book written? Do we know?
19 or not 19? It was
1890 something.
I want to say 18. I literally just looked this up and I forgot. I think it was 1889 was
Yeah.
published.
So the book is different in that it takes place in England.
Yes.
Mhm.
H.G. Wells was from England, so the attack happens nearby the London area.
War of the Worlds was published 1898, so like pre-World War One.
Yeah, and so they use weapons of that time, which is soldiers and artillery and ships, like battleships. There's no mention of aircraft because, yeah,
They didn't have it.
no, that would have been the first airplane would be more like 1908, I think. It was the very, very beginning. So,
I mean, the concept of air flight was not exactly alien to them at the time. That they understood that it was in theory possible. They just didn't have the technology to make it happen at that point. Apart from hot air balloons.
Yeah, I was gonna say at that point they they did have like hot air balloons and that sort of thing.
yeah, even rocketry was not fully a concept because H.G. Wells in the original book, he described that there were plumes from Mars, meaning that they're probably using something like a cannon to shoot spacecraft into space to come to Earth, and they would land like meteorites, which would confuse everyone. And
I mean,
because no one knew that they were spacecraft, they just knew that they were objects falling down like a meteorite. That was their first assumption. It was just an object from space.
I mean, even into World War II, the debate between missiles versus super rockets or super cannons. Sorry, the missiles versus super cannons was still being debated on the battlefield, right? Germans,
They built some big guns.
Yeah, they built some
thought
really big guns. Because
some amazingly big guns. Yeah.
At the same time, they also built the first effective missile systems. So,
right.
a little bit of both.
Yeah, but you can tell because they built those big guns, they didn't know which technology was the one to really make a big difference. They kind of like did a little bit of all of them. And then afterwards, the whole rockets turned out to be the big winner when it comes to getting objects into space.
To the point where I think there was even this might have just been like a hokey thing, but I know there was at least one German scientist who was in the Middle East during like the 80s and 90s, trying to sell his super cannon that would put things into orbit that would eventually land on, Western powers or whatever. I don't think he got very far. but definitely has some certain groups in the Middle East at least paying attention to him.
Well, I mean, there's the concept of using like a mass driver to put things to launch payloads into orbit outside of having to use a rocket for everything, but I don't think that's really a canon per se.
No, but they speed it up really fast and then let it fly, and they might be able to get small things.
But I mean, this guy actually had real, like he was really saying, super cannon was the way, and it was actually a super cannon, but it wasn't. I don't. Real most scientists say that I guess in theory it could possibly work, but nobody's ever going to put the kind of not when for a much cheaper and easier you could just build a rocket that would do the same thing. So
yeah, and can we backtrack for a hot second, because I had a very delayed reaction idea come to me, a thought.
Go ahead. Give it to us.
Is this a book that Jeff read that Gary hasn't?
War of the Worlds?
Yeah.
Jeff is really big into H.G. Wells, and I am not, so I'm not surprised about this.
I am?
Really?
Like, yeah. In all honesty, Jeff, I have never read any of I don't think I've ever sat down and read any of the H.G. Wells stuff, so you own that author. Congratulations.
I own an author.
Yes, you own that author. You are the subject matter expert on H.G. Wells in our friend group.
Just out of everything book related we've ever talked about, I think this is the first time that it's been Jeff and not Gary, and it took me like a good 10 minutes for that to penetrate my brain and be like, hey, wait a minute.
Something's amiss here. What's going on?
What?
Jeff?
Why is Gary asking questions about the book instead of Jeff? What's going on here?
Jeff understands concepts like reading more than Gary does? Oh my goodness.
Our small audience will not really understand how odd that really is. But it goes in the face of a lifetime of consistency.
It's like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. There's something wrong here.
No, BJ, it's the Mandela effect. You just understood something differently for the entire time. Jeff's the book expert.
No.
Okay, we're still not gaslighting BJ into believing that, but
yeah, I'm not that tired.
That's not the case.
I will never be that tired.
Maybe if it was like a news broadcast and they said, breaking news, apparently Jeff is well-read.
Has read more books than Gary.
Like, I have to believe this now. The news is saying it.
Jeff has read more books than Gary.
No, in reality, our ratio is probably like 1,000 to 1. But
Jeff owns H.G. Wells. That is his thing, so I don't touch it.
I have read a lot of his books, I will admit. I've even read he wrote us. But anyway, I won't go into that. But yeah, I have read and listened to a lot of them. He has one called The Sea Lady that I thought was really nice that is definitely boring for most people. But there's a few things in there that was good. But this is his famous book, though. War of the Worlds is his number one, I think.
I think it's
The Time Machine is another big favorite of mine. That's also popular. I was
about to say, didn't he also do The Time Machine? I remember him more for that.
Yeah.
I wasn't a terribly big fan of The Time Machine.
I gotta admit, a lot of people like The Invisible Man, but I actually thought that one was super boring. But
no, yeah. Out of the Wells I've read, I think The War of the Worlds is the only one I've read more than once.
It is extremely well written. H.G. Wells was a big idea guy. He has some really amazing ideas that are really first of everything, really. He's one of the foundational science fiction authors. Jules Verne came before him, but I think that he really built upon the science fiction genre quite extensively.
I think I've only read one Jules Verne book, and I was incredibly bored.
Books from that time were different.
Yeah.
They
think
were
we've
mostly a travel log,
Yeah, I was gonna say
predominantly.
Jules Verne was 20,000 Leagues, right?
Well, I don't want to give out, but he has kind of a sequel to 20,000 Leagues, which I was surprised at. Kind of like the
Yes, but he wrote 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, right?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, it's kind of a really boring book.
It's mostly like
By
them
modern standards, at
by
any
modern
rate.
standards. I did
Yeah.
read it because I was, when you read those books, they're nothing like the movie. Because the movies they make of it, they focus on like 20% of the story. That they take 20% of the story and make it into like 80% of a movie. Because that's the part that
Well,
people like the most.
that's because the rest of the book is him. That's because the rest of the book is him describing all the fish they see, which
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
sure at the time, there's no like magazines of like high quality color photography of all these tropical fish. So, he has to describe what they're looking at, right?
Exactly.
So I
It's
get
like
it, but
it's like a
really
story
boring to a
and
modern person.
yeah, it's like the equivalent of reading a story, but also getting a copy of National Geographic kind of a thing. You get you get to see a bit of the world, or at least hear about it, and then you get this tiny story about Captain Nemo thrown into
Yeah.
it. But War of the Worlds, going back to it, it is such a downer of a story. It's a cataclysmic, everything's being destroyed,
Yep.
and it's chaos. But it has such a great ending, I think, because it puts you through absolute agony through the entire book, and at the very end, when despair is all that could be seen and understood, there's a little bit of grace at the end, and it's not humans that have conquered the aliens. They have been spared by this thing that we've hated, like germs that have killed and brought disease and all this suffering. This terrible thing that we hated so bad has then served to save humanity, and it's such a fascinating ending. Where, yeah, go ahead.
I would honestly say that would be more disturbing to me if I was living through these particular events, because where other stories have humanity stopping this through their own power, stopping or being in control of the events, all of the events are completely taken outside of our control in this story, and it's kind of disturbing where you can't or humans didn't stop these aliens. Like, yes,
Yeah.
the aliens are, but eventually the aliens are going to figure out, they're going to figure out hand sanitizer, and then what are we going to do? Right? They're going to figure out how to seal their cockpits against us or whatever. I mean, it didn't really, it kind of talked about it in the broadcast, that they were gathering the humans up to be used as cattle or something. I don't know. It didn't really go into depth as to the purpose or reason why the aliens were coming here, right? To Earth.
Well, I don't think they ever really say because theoretically the Martians are supposed to be like
They don't get to sit down and have an interview
No.
with the Martians. No, they're just kind of supposing this is what they want and what they're doing.
They go into it in more they go into it in more detail in the book, obviously, and they kind of mention it in passing a couple times in radio broadcasts, but the Martians eat people, or at least drink their blood.
So the idea then is that they've come all the way. That they've come over here for a light snack,
or new food source. Unlike
in
there's
in the book. Sorry, BJ, I cut you off. I must let you have the talk. Okay. Well, in the book, the
I
reason
throw the talking stick at you.
throw it at, it'll hit me on the head. Okay.
Oh, wow.
So in the book, the reason why the Martians want to go to Earth is because Mars is a desolate place. It's hard to survive on Mars. They had a very, very hard existence on Mars, and it actually made them smarter and tougher because that environment was so harsh. But at the same time, they looked over at Earth and they're like, wow, Earth is nice. That's where we want to be. So they decided to go to Earth just because it was better than Mars. And they decided to go and to try to get this better planet. Yeah.
So
basically the Martians were different and
so
and humans were everyone else.
So
it's the phrase in ways Gary will understand.
So as soon as the Martians figure out how to cook their food and use hand sanitizer, we're kind of screwed.
Well, I would say no, because yes, hand sanitizer, cook your food. There are ways of trying to handle bacteria and decrease that danger, but in the end, there are microbes everywhere. So keeping yourself safe from microbes in the end is just an impossibility. The best you can do is like wash your hands to keep most of them away and then rely on your immune system to save you. The Martians did not have an immune system they were just completely incompatible with our biosphere.
So to kind of put into a context, I don't know how true it is. I've heard some people argue that War of the Worlds was supposed to be sort of a commentary on colonialism, imperialism, like modern cultures going out and conquering more primitive cultures, and then and they know we'd go to these places and whoop, malaria.
Yeah, well, there is something to that because the Martians were more powerful, and I think it was there to kind of do an introspective look at how we might treat another creature that we have an advantage over, because the Martians have complete advantage over humanity, and look how they use that power against us. So it's a way of kind of getting that idea in your head, like this is what it's like to be the footstool of a superior intelligence, of a greater being. And so it's introspective because now we can look at like how will we treat other species? How will we, if we ever go to another planet, what would we do? What kind of morals, judgment would we have? Because we have to reflect upon this experience. It's I don't know if it gives
and then kind becomes Star Trek.
And then becomes Star Trek. And then the Prime Directive comes. Okay. But I don't know if it gives a major conclusion. It just kind of poses, look at the catastrophe from when one creature can destroy another. Look at all of that it comes. But anyway, yeah, I don't know if there's really a solid conclusion, though, that it makes.
It's been a while, so I can't remember, like, at the end of the book, if they say, like, if they say the equivalent of watch the skies or whatever, right?
But it does have an end of the world vibe, and I don't know of any other story that does that. As far as I know, this is the first story that ever posed the idea of a destroyed humanity, because at the very end of the book and also this radio broadcast, our main character, who is usually a scientist, is now wandering through a desolate world. He can't even find another human, and he eventually does find one person, and he's so glad that one person is still there. He even, in the book, he goes to his home, and he sees that his home is basically nearly all destroyed.
Yeah, and, the artilleryman is a much bigger character in the book. But this one he just kind of pops up at the end and gives his little spiel.
But after that, in the broadcast, though, it does talk about how he eventually wanders up and discovers the aliens, having died of bacteria. And then it kind of gives a postscript of like a year later where children are returning, they've got, everybody's returning and everybody's rebuilding, and they've put all of the, they dismantled all of the aliens' machines and put them in museums or something like that. So... Yeah,
I mean that does happen in the book. The narrator does travel to London. He essentially tries to kill himself by by approaching a tripod, but the pilot of the tripod is dead, so that's kind of when he figures it out.
He doesn't want to live in a world that is destroyed. Like, you're basically running and barely surviving and barely eating. It's an apocalyptic end. And
yeah, like that part in the book lasts a lot longer than does in the broadcast. He's like stuck in the house with the curate for like what, a couple of weeks, I think. You recall, Jeff?
I don't know exactly, but yeah, he does spend some time in his house, just kind of trying, just like lamenting about the world that has been lost.
Well, and like in the book, he's like stuck in this house with something he like. I think it's a curate. I could be wrong, but he's like stuck in this house with a guy he doesn't really get along with.
Yeah, and other versions.
So it's like the world's ending, and I'm stuck here with this guy I hate. Dang it! It's kind of like what would happen if you guys were stuck with me at the end of the world. I would get on your nerves in no time flat. Jeff laughs because it's true.
Yeah, at the end of the world, you would have a lot to say. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I knew long ago that me and Jeff could never be roommates because I would eventually drive Jeff to murder me.
It's easy enough. Like, what? Well, I did the whole roommate with Jeff for a while there, and it's easy enough if you just like never, sit in your own little corner and never talk to each other. So
I thought you were going to say it's easy enough to get BJ to want someone to murder him.
Well,
but
okay, before we give out too many incriminating,
he's not denying it.
But there's usually there's that scene with the guy, but I know there's a scene in many movies that is also in the book that's where there's people getting away on a boat, and there's one of the robotic Martian vehicles comes over the horizon, and people are they're desperate to get across this river, and then the Martian comes and they're all suddenly trapped. It's a very terrifying scene. It reminds me of a Godzilla movie because they do that kind of thing too, where they're at this junction point and so you get all the terror of the situation.
So in the book, that's the scene with the Thunder Child, and the Thunder Child actually does hold the tripods off long enough for a lot of the ships to escape, but I guess that's not apocalyptic enough for more modern filmmakers to have like, oh, everybody dies, ha 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 ha, or whatever.
Yeah.
Or at least that's what happens like the Spielberg version, which I'm not terribly fond of.
I don't think I've ever watched that one. I watched the 50s version.
The 50s version is good. It's good.
That is a good version.
It's good 50s sci-fi. The Spielberg version is very 90s, 2000s Spielberg when he's like not being, what's the word? It's kind of a serious face. He's not, his movies then are very whimsical, I guess. Like some of his earlier stuff is.
Okay. I actually liked the Spielberg War of the Worlds, but at the same time, I don't watch it anymore. Like, I saw it maybe 1 or 2 times, and then I'm done with it. I don't need to see it again. It is a stressful movie. It is dark, and it's very serious. I think it's well done, but it's definitely not something you want to watch and then be in a good mood afterwards.
I mean, like, there are good movies that you don't want to watch multiple times. Like, I watched the unedited version of John Carpenter's The Thing, like, maybe once or twice. I'm like, okay, I don't need to see that again. That was good and stressful, but...
Yeah, I understand that as a movie concept as well. I've seen a few...
And very impressive practical effects that I don't need to ever see again.
I think Spielberg, what was unique about his take on War of the Worlds is that he made it very realistic, in my opinion. I mean, as far as Hollywood terms, he made it pretty realistic in that you've got the effects of psychological mass hysteria. You've got people seeing terrible things and becoming psychologically damaged from that. You've got all the cataclysmic stuff of the Martians attacking, and people don't know what's going on. There's an EMP in that movie, and people are like, I don't know what's happening, and none of our machines are working anymore. And the one guy
Except for that one
recognizes,
guy's video camera.
yeah, this one guy knows kind of what an EMP is, and he can recognize that something's off. And then it also has a
there's
family
like
that
this one random scene of like this guy. Oh, it's like the tripod. Oh, well, like in like the Spielberg version, like the Martians pop up from like underground, right?
I don't remember that. You're probably right. It's been a while.
It's like something weird like that. It's
They
like,
do land, and then they come out of their ships, which is
no,
no.
it's where in the
Come out of
Spielberg
ground?
version. Yeah, I want to say that in the Spielberg version they're like underground or something.
They have the tripod things.
Ye-
Yeah.
Yes, they have tripods.
Yeah.
It's I
I
would
don't know.
say it's like I was gonna say it's like impossible to make War of the World movies without the tripods, but then again, they made a Starship Troopers movie without power armor, so I guess it's possible.
Well, in the
1950s,
1950s,
yeah.
didn't they had like weird flying saucers? That
Yeah,
had,
they threw out the tripod in the 1950s.
Well,
it's just kind of a floating flying saucer thing. So yeah.
Actually, very technically, if you watch like the behind the scenes stuff, they are tripods. They just have like electromagnetic legs. If you like watch the flying saucers, there's like little sparks
Really?
underneath them as they fly along. So
I didn't know
technically
that.
tripods, but like it's not something you would notice. Like it's not something that most people would notice. Like I only know about because I watched some behind the scenes thing.
So apparently we missed it. There was some sort of like invisible leg, some sort of energy source that
Yeah,
made foot, like leg. They were like legs walking that wasn't hovering.
Yes, so very technically not flying saucer, but yeah, flying saucer. For all effects and purposes, flying saucer.
Yeah. Can't think of much else.
Yeah, but definitely the first use of a heat ray, I think, in sci-fi was War of the Worlds. You have an alien attack. The heat ray, I think, was new. Yeah, I want to say it was. And then the first time a world apocalypse was put into a science fiction story, which was really well described, especially the emotional side of it, because the main character is now walking through a desolate world, and how and in the radio broadcast they talk about that, like there's no more restaurants, no more concerts, like you can't do that now. And I really like in the radio broadcast how he talks about people would all go to work, and they would, be on the bus and the train on time. They'd get into the office, and then they'd hurry home, and they'd pay for insurance to cover all the dangerous things they didn't want to happen, and how those people would be okay living under occupation from the Martians because they were used to being in a routine. But other people that weren't used to that routine would never survive under Martian occupation. I thought all of that was interesting dialogue. And
that other survivor did seem kind of a little he definitely had some ideas on how he was going to make it. So
well, that's also from the book, but in the book I don't think, and again, I have not read the book in a while. In the book, he just talks about he talks about using the tripod to fight the Martians. I don't think he ever says, and we'll use it to conquer the world, like the guy in the radio broadcast does. That's something they threw in for the radio broadcast because well, they didn't want to do the whole
trade one monster
few days he does hanging out with the artillerymen. They had to get it over and done with in like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
I think, but there's usually somebody he meets, and that person is a little crazy. And it shows how people, this terrible event that happens with the Martian invasion, it causes people to have severe psychological distress. and they're not themselves through the whole thing, which is part of the apocalyptic downfall, is that people's sanity slips away during the entire thing.
Well,
And this, yeah,
you take away the trappings of society and people start to revert to more primitive modes of thought fairly easily. So I guess there's that.
It's I don't know if you guys heard of it, but there's the Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yes.
Yes, that's the actual thing in psychology that says, yeah, the really ideal thoughts we have, the real like higher levels of thinking about fairness and logic and let's all sit down and talk about what we need to do to get along. All of that stuff is on the top of the hierarchy of needs, which means that if you're in a desperate situation where your basic needs are not being met, you're starving, you're under dangerous circumstances or other things like that, it means those higher levels of thought will actually not exist in your brain because you'll be too focused on the basic survival. Yeah, and in these stories, it kind of goes into that's why people go crazy and have a hard time psychologically keeping themselves together because they're just desperate for survival. Anyway, we talked about psychology.
Okay. Yay.
Look it up.
Yay.
Yay.
It was Jeff this time, not me. Anyways, but yeah, that's pretty much all I've got about this one. It wasn't a very long thing, but that's okay.
I mean,
it doesn't have to be.
Okay, so question, as we're wrapping up. Do you guys think that it was right what Orson Welles did, or was it wrong for him to do this broadcast? Was it irresponsible completely and he never should have done it? Or was it fine? What do you think?
From everything I read, like most of the panic, again, it seems to be, I can't say there is no hysteria caused by it, but it seems to be very played up, shall we say. Like I said before, it was a combination of fake news in the form of newspapers trying to play up, oh, look how irresponsible radio is, and sort of a culture-wide Mandela effect after all these years of people going back and seeing all these newspaper stories. Like I read something that like over 10,000 newspaper stories were published about the panic in air quotes. So I think it was fine. Again, I don't think the panic is as widespread as, or at very least the modern evidence. It's funny to say because it's something we should have records of because it happened like 90 years ago, but there's conflicting evidence, but more evidence to not suggest that it was not the big panic that we were told it was when we were younger.
I honestly think that my grandma's story was probably the most typical of what would happen on your typical household that actually listened to this broadcast, where some people got really worried for a minute. Maybe they didn't catch all of it and they didn't understand what they were listening to, and then they caught it in the middle and they're all starting to get worried, and then it would end and they'd be like, oh, ha, ha, ha. And then that'd be just something they could laugh at later. So I think that's...
But the sheer fact that there was a danger that they would be misinterpreting it in the middle, is that enough to say it never should have happened?
No.
Just
no.
Okay.
I think this was exactly as Orson Welles said at the end of the broadcast. This was just a little bit of Halloween fun. At least that's what it said in the end of the one I was listening to. Yep. He was just like saying, "Hey, we're just having a little fun. It's the radio equivalent of putting up some spooky decorations." So,
See, I'm conflicted though because go ahead, BJ.
I'm just saying, for there to be, in most situations, for there to be like any like real panic, you would have to go from like 0 to 100 in panic mode in like less than 20 minutes, because otherwise you get to some point or other in the story where they straight up tell you it's a radio broadcast, or like Orson Welles starts monologuing, right? Like there was one case, I think it was Concrete, Washington, where there was a bit of a panic there because like mid-radio broadcast, a thunderstorm hit, so they lost all radio and power, so they couldn't get the word that it was just a radio broadcast. But like outside of like that specific situation, you would have to go from zero to panic really quick.
Okay, so I'm conflicted because on the one hand, you have to be careful with news in general. If people cannot trust the news, that's bad. But
you don't say.
There's like an hour discussion attached to that. But anyway, we don't have to go down that.
Trusting the news, Jeff?
What? Never.
That would never happen.
Never.
It's a negative thing.
Ever.
It's a very negative thing. So at the one hand, I think even doing this type of mock news that could potentially be interpreted as real news is dangerous. And so on the one hand, I think, well, that's probably a reason why this kind of radio broadcast or this kind of entertainment hasn't really been very common. Maybe it happens once in a while, but generally they don't want to do it because they do want to kind of separate news and entertainment so that it's clearly defined. But on the other hand, I think there's something that the audience gains from being fooled like this. Even though they weren't completely fooled, to some extent they were, just because the audience can realize that maybe I should think critically about everything I hear. And sometimes when I hear something that seems one way, I should stop and be like, okay, but we're now at a point in the radio program where there's a lone guy traveling through a destroyed world, and he's commenting about how the world's destroyed now. And how in the world could this still be a news broadcast at this point?
Yeah, that's
essentially you put
that's
it
what
together.
I'm saying. Like,
yeah, and how do they get a cable out to the artilleryman who's firing on the Martians? How did they throw that together within 10 minutes? I mean, we're in the middle of a major crisis, yet they managed to do all of that.
Yeah, it's like I said at the very beginning. Maybe it's not fair. Maybe it's not fair for me to say because maybe the government was way more efficient back in 1938. But they got boots on the ground and birds in the air in like less than 10 minutes to fight the Martians.
Yeah.
Yeah. So on the other hand, the audience can benefit from this type of entertainment because for a lot of people who just trust everything that they hear implicitly, now they get a chance to see, oh, by the way, look, some things can just be entertainment. And if you miss the beginning and the end of it, you're going to not realize what it is. But also just by listening to it, you can key in on certain things and be like, oh, this is just an entertainment broadcast. This is not the news. I can tell just by how they're talking and what they're doing as to what it is. So I think it improves the audience to be given these kinds of things. But on the other hand, I mean, it's still kind of reckless. So I'm caught. I don't have a good answer. I don't. But anyway, go ahead.
Now, I would just say that there's always going to be some idiot. You can't not do something just because that one person is going to do something stupid about.
Well, there will always be people who go too far. I mean, there's 7 billion people on the planet. Like, what's the odds that all of us are going to do the right thing? Even if just 1% of the population of Earth does crazy things when they hear something.
Like, I could go on the radio, declare the sky is blue, and somebody would have a problem with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not blue, it's sunset. And on certain cities with high pollution, it might be more of a different
It's
color.
only blue in your part of the world, you fist.
I don't know. Yeah, just don't. It's kind of.
Altogether,
you can't stop yourself from having fun. And I think that this was just meant to be fun. So.
Yes.
Yeah, I think society is better off with this kind of thing. I think the reason why we love entertainment is because it helps us think. Obviously, some of it is very bland or it's very exaggerated. Yeah, and some of it is kind of trashy. Yes, entertainment can do a lot of silly things, but the whole point of entertainment in the end, in my little opinion, is it's mind exercises. It helps us think about things. Our brain can process something, and then later on, when we live through real life, we have all of this type of... We've at least felt and thought things, which can help us in real life in the long term, to some extent. Which is why human beings love to play, they love to think, they love to imagine, they love to say what if, and go through hypothetical scenarios. It's why dreams are often weird. It's just playing and trying to figure things out with a little bit of randomness. It's trying to make our brain better. Whether it always succeeds in that, I'm not going to claim that, because that's a big claim, but that's the attempt. Yeah, so it probably was good in a lot of ways to trick people, or at least to some extent trick them. Which, whether it really was an intended trick or not, that's another question.
I mean, apparently that depends when you ask Orson Welles about it. Like, later in life, he sort of leaned to the idea, oh yeah, we totally knew that was going to happen. But like when it did happen, they're like, no, we did not plan it this way. But yeah. Continue. Okay. Final thoughts?
Final thoughts.
I've got no final thoughts.
Yeah. I will choose not to have final thoughts.
Actually, I think, Jeff, you've been saying your final thoughts for like the last, 5-10 minutes. But anyways.
I know. I've had my chance.
I mean, that's kind of what the call for final thoughts is Jeff's last chance to monologue.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm shutting myself up, though. That's all I will say. Mic drop.
Last man on Earth has now stopped talking. Okay. So I guess that's it then. I'm BJ. With me was Jeff and Gary. And we will see you next time. Unless the Martians invade or something. I don't know.
Watch the skies.
Watch the skies. That's not from War of the Worlds, but whatever.